Good day, scholars. Today we are going to go over U.S. History Standards 15 and 16. um, First standard is analyze the origins and impact of U.S. involvement in World War One. All right, first starting off with isolationism and neutrality. While Europe was at war, the U.S. continued to hold to its policy of isolationism and neutrality by not getting involved in affairs of Europe or other nations. To make sure the U.S. stayed out of World War One as it was being fought in Europe, President Wilson issued a declaration of neutrality to officially let the world know the U.S. would not participate in the war. Even with the declaration of neutrality, the U.S. still loaned money to allies, and American businesses sent supplies to Britain. Cause of the entry of World War One. Unrestricted submarine warfare by the German attacked both Allied warships and any commercial ships belonging to neutral countries. Germany sank the merchant ship Lusitania, which killed 128 Americans. Zimmerman note, which threatened American security and violated Roosevelt's coronary was sent by Germany to Mexico to ask them to help defeat the U.S. Of course, they offered to help them regain some of the territory that they did lose to the United States. Places like California, New Mexico, would even, I think it was also Texas as well. All right, moving forward. All right, U.S. declares war. World War One led to an increase in power of the federal government and change in demographics of the U.S. Government created wartime boards that managed business and factories to meet military needs. The U.S. borrowed money from citizens by selling Liberty bonds. And the U.S. increased income and excise taxes. And excise means they remove taxes or scale back on taxes. Moving forward. All right, domestic issues. The U.S. increased the power of the government by passing laws that prohibited people from speaking out against the war. President Wilson stated that every man would pay a penalty for nonconformity, basically criticizing the war. Congress passed the Espionage Act, which punished people for spying, sabotaging, or obstructing the war effort. The Supreme Court case decision in Shekin versus the U.S. Enforced the Espionage Act by stating that the U.S. government can restrict the First Amendment right to freedom of speech when there is a clear and present danger to national security. This is a ongoing issues in times of war, not just in the United States, but other countries as well, when countries go at war, they tend to give up their freedoms, whether it be freedom of press toward propaganda or something like that, or their own rights, rights to privacy, in order for protection. And the more at risk a society is, the more that its citizens are likely to be willing to give up certain rights to be protected. So that's a dangerous concept, a dangerous place for any country to be, because that allows individuals or leaders to come in and impose their own, not necessarily will, but their own rhetoric or their own agenda in front. A lot of situations like this, whether it be Napoleon during the French Revolution or after the French Revolution, or even Hitler slightly before World War II, things of that nature. And I'm sure you all learned a lot about that in world history, but we'll move on. Espionage Act. Eugene versus Debs, a socialist, was arrested for speeches against the war and sentenced to prison. The trial of Sasko and Vanzetti was influenced by government fears and restrictions on immigration. These two immigrants, who were open critics of the government, were tried and executed for robbery and murder, even without evidence that proved guilt. The trial shocked and angered many Americans who believed they were innocent. All right, the Great Migration of 1.5 million African Americans moving from the South to northern cities to work in factories. Immigration was temporarily suspended during the war due to fears. So more jobs were open to blacks and women. As you can see, this is a chart of the Great Migration. As you can see, a lot of people coming from Florida up into places like Washington, and Virginia, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, Buffalo, New York, even Boston, even Albany, New York. And then you can see also people from Alabama and Mississippi. Those African Americans moved up toward Tennessee, Louisville, Kentucky, Cincinnati, Dayton, Toledo, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, Dalton, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, and even to Pittsburgh and Cleveland, Ohio. Oh, Detroit, Michigan, of course, Toledo as well. This is I actually have a lot of family who moved from the state of Mississippi to Chicago, and on my father's side, Cleveland. So this was a true migration of sort. Also, you look at Louisiana and Arkansas and Texas, a lot of people went from those areas to California, and Oakland, California, and Los Angeles, and then they also went, as you can see, to Minneapolis, Minnesota, Iowa, what is that, Davenport, Iowa, St. Louis. So, that was a deep, 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 deep move from certain areas to northern areas or places where they felt like they could find more freedom, especially from these, what at the time were those Jim Crow laws and segregation. But moving forward, the result of World War I. The war ended with the Treaty of Versailles. It blamed Germany for the war and forced them to pay reparations. It also stripped Germany of its territories. President Wilson proposed his 14 points in an effort to bring lasting peace in the world. The Treaty of Versailles included a League of Nations, but America was opposed to it, fearing that it would take away our sovereignty, our power as a nation to make our own decisions. And it forced the U.S. into future conflicts with European conflict, into future European conflicts. The U.S. Never ended up joining the League of Nations, which was quite a shame because it was a great idea by Woodrow Wilson, President Woodrow Wilson, which ended up being the structured device that they used to build up the United Nations. That was, of course, after World War II. And some of these sanctions that they put on Germany and the reparations that they placed upon them to repay some of those countries that went to war with them were astronomical figures. It was, and they would see later that the Germans actually felt like that they couldn't pay it. It was so overwhelming. But these sanctions and this aggressive push toward basically to cripple Germany ended up being the pathway in which it led to Adolf Hitler coming to power. But that's another subject. Moving forward. All right, the Treaty of Versailles. All right, the treaty was signed by Germany in 1919 and punished Germany for starting the war. Germany would have to dismantle their army and navy, pay war reparation of $33 billion, which they did not have, admit guilt for causing the war, and Germany was not allowed to place any troops in the Rhineland, the strip of land 50 miles wide next to France. The treaty left Germany in shambles, as I stated before. Most of Wilson's 14 points were dismissed by the other leaders, with the exception of the 14 points. All right, Wilson's League of Nations was voted down by the U.S. Congress in 1920. Many congressmen worried that it made the U.S. too involved in European affairs. As you can see, this picture of Uncle Sam, and you can see that picture. This League of Nations bridge was designed by the U.S., designed by the President of the United States. So it's really a disconnect, as you can see, between England and Italy and France and Belgium. Moving forward, and then you can see the missing piece of that disconnect is under the head of Uncle Sam, and that keystone was the United States. So they couldn't build that bridge without the U.S. Moving forward. All right. Just moving on to the next standard, which is U.S. History Standard 16, investigate how political, economic, and cultural developments after World War I led to a shared national identity. All right. Communism. Um, Revolution in Russia led to the creation of a dictatorship in which workers shared the means of production and distribution. This socialist revolution led to a more extreme form called communism, which called for an overthrow of capitalism. Americans' fear of communism eventually led to efforts to defend the U.S. from its spread. The fear of communism was called the First Red Scare. Because communism appealed to workers, the idea of it infiltrated labor unions. Labor unions leaders, Eugene V. Debs, the Socialist Party presidential candidate in 1904, 1908, and 1912, was convicted for hindering military recruitment by making a speech against it. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was also permanently forbidden to vote. Palmer raids, which was a series of raids by the FBI against suspected anarchists and communists, and immigration restrictions like the National Origin Act that set limits on the number of immigrants who could enter the United States. They began to prevent further attacks in the U.S. by those who oppose the system of American government. Racism, discrimination, anti-immigrant sentiment spread throughout the nation as a result of fear. The Red Scare was perceived by many to be a threat to the very foundations of the U.S. And this was a huge thing in and of its time, because even actors at the time were claimed to be communists, or someone would say they heard that they were communists, and this would really lead to them being blackballed, or as you all would call it, a part of the first form that we know of as a cancel culture. So this really affected people because it kind of almost forced them to take a position against communism, whether they really liked it or not. They could, you could have no real opinion on it, but you'd be forced to almost condemn it because you wouldn't want to be shunned upon by the rest of society, which was a great pressure of society in that period of time. Moving forward. All right, 18th and 19th Amendments. One result of the 18th Amendment that prohibited the sale and distribution of alcohol was the rise in organized crime, which is the rise of the mafia. Later, the 21st Amendment repealed or overturned the 18th Amendment so that the government could place taxes on liquor. Speakeasies, or secret clubs and bars that sold liquor, and bootleggers, illegal liquor sellers and markers, profited from illegal alcohol sales. All right, the 19th Amendment. It enfranchised women who had been fighting since the Seneca Falls Convention in the early 19th century era of reform. Suffrage was finally granted after women's economic contribution to the war effort during World War I. So, simply stated, women gained the right to vote. Moving forward. All right, the Roaring Twenties. All right, in 1920 the 1920s was a time of increased consumerism, which is the desire of buyers to purchase an increasing amount of goods due to opportunities to now purchase goods on credit. All right, credit. All right, new products were introduced through creative advertising to the American public, including cars and household appliances. All right, Henry Ford was the developer of the first mass production of automobiles. He used assembly lines to quickly build cars. An idea he actually got from George Washington Carver. Moving forward. Due to improved production methods, prices dropped, and the average American could now afford a car. All right, more people begin to move to the suburbs now that they have cars. Increases in the number of cars also led to the need for more highways, roads, and new businesses like motels, gas stations, and restaurants. Also, you have to keep in mind as well that with this assembly line and this production of these cars, Henry Ford was able to share the wealth, so to speak, as he was able to increase the amount of money that he was giving his workers. So with the increased amount of money that he gave his workers, the more that they were able to buy and the more that they wanted the thing that they were building, cars. So Henry Ford helped to kickstart this idea of consumerism, consumption of these goods. All right, moving forward. All right, as you can see that first assembly line, what those assembly lines for cars look like. All right, radio and movies. Post-World War I marked the beginning of mass media, or commercial radio and movies. All right, and this rise of mass media was a unifying force in the nation's national culture. Radio included news, stories, and advertising. Movies were a big business that helped establish new popular culture and celebrities. Radio and movies were a unifying force in national culture. All right, you can look at some of these posters of these popular cultures. I don't know if y'all know who Al Capone is, but that's Al Capone over there on your left, right under Broadway, right under B on Broadway. Let's see who else I can see. I see Babe Ruth. There's with the New York jersey on. I see Louis Armstrong with that trumpet in his hand, and I see Mr. Duke Ellington, front guy with the slick hair to the back, and Charlie Chaplin, the guy with the top hat and a little mustache. Yep. Moving forward. All right, more pictures. As you can see, this is how they sat and listened to the radio, right? Or records. Yeah, and then you can see what that microphone looked back in the day to your bottom left. All right, the Harlem Renaissance. All right, Harlem Renaissance. The 1920s was also the age of the Harlem Renaissance. This was the first significant artistic movement from Black culture that impacted the entire nation. Art, literature, music, dance, and the jazz age were all elements of the Harlem Renaissance. Jazz originated by African Americans in New Orleans and became the major music genre of the Roaring Twenties. All right, artists and performers included Langston Hughes, Duke Ellington, Zora Neale Hurston, and Louis Armstrong, who were famous during this age where blacks were not allowed to attend the Cotton Club except as performers on stage to entertain whites. All right, here's a poem by Langston Hughes. I, too, sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh, and I eat well, and I grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then, besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed I too am America. Great poem by Langston Hughes. All right, as usual, of course, this is the conclusion of the lecture. You can contact me best on the Remind app. Of course, my email, terrelljohnson@k12.org. My desk phone, 404-491-0952, and classroom phone, 678-842-6850, extension 1103. Of course, those calls will go straight to voicemail, but I will get back with you as soon as I get the message. All emails or calls received after 3:30 p.m. will be answered on the following workday at my earliest convenience. Tutorial, of course, is always by appointment on Wednesdays from 8 a.m. to 1:30. And also keep in mind, if you need any extra assistance or modification, especially on tests or accommodation toward tests, we normally take care of those things on Wednesdays. So make sure that you contact me, or in case of second block, make sure you contact me or Ms. Canales. All right, that's all I have for today, today's lecture. And you guys have a great day. Thanks again. Bye.